I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to another episode of More Than Kurosawa. And this week we're going to be looking at the film Hero by director Zhang Yimou, one of the most dazzling visual movies I've ever seen from one of the most important and critical Chinese directors in history. But if you're new to the series, what I do every single week is review a different Asian movie by a different Asian director to help us understand the wide world of Asian cinema, to showcase that there is more than Kurosawa, there is more than Hayao Miyazaki or Bong Joon-ho, some of these more popular Asian directors that maybe you've seen a couple of their movies, but there's a whole 100-year history of Asian cinema. Mostly we look at East Asian cinema and the kind of great directors that are within there. And I really want to highlight Chinese, Korean, Japanese, Filipino, as in last week, all these different types of great countries and their great filmmakers, and kind of highlight some people that aren't always as mainstream as someone like maybe a Kurosawa, but has made films equally as great. You guys have been showing a lot of support for me on this journey as we explore kind of East Asian cinema here on this channel. So if you appreciate the videos, comment below. Let me know if you want to see any directors that we haven't covered yet so far. Let me know if you've seen some of the movies that we've covered and your thoughts on them. I'd love to hear that in the comments down below. But we usually like to structure these videos in two parts. The first half, talking about the filmmaker, what makes him special, because this is the only time we're going to talk about them because we cover a new director every single week. And then the second half of the video, discuss about the film, what makes the film interesting in context to the director's career. And jumping into things now, starting off with the discussion of really why I wanted to cover Zhang Yimou. And that's because I felt like covering another Chinese director. Diao Ye was another Chinese director that we've covered, but that was really early on in the series, and I really wanted to cover more Chinese directors because when you think about Asian cinema, of course, China is a huge country, and then, of course, the Chinese film industry is massive. A lot of Western movies can play in China and do great business over there, but then they also have their own kind of thriving film industry. And to me, when I think about Chinese directors, one of the most popular and famous is Zhang Yimou because of how so many of his movies are directly connected to China and Chinese history and Chinese culture. And in order to understand his career, I think it's best to kind of divide it up into mostly two halves: the social commentary period piece half, and then the wuxia films in the second half. Starting off with that first half, you could connect Zhang Yimou to the fifth generation of Chinese filmmakers, where for the first time a lot of Chinese filmmakers were getting international acclaim. This is in the late 80s, early 90s. Movies like The Horse Thief top the list of Martin Scorsese's best movies of the 90s. You have movies like Farewell My Concubine, which wins the Palme d'Or or ties it with Jane Campion's The Piano. So really, international acclaim in some of these festivals. Zhang Yimou himself had Raise the Red Lantern, which had some international acclaim. And in this period of Yimou's films, you see a lot of politically minded social type of movies, social dramas. They may be period pieces in the case of Raise the Red Lantern, or set in different generations in a movie like To Live, but they all, I think, have kind of social commentaries on their mind, oftentimes trying to understand the balance of kind of class disparities or gender disparities in a post-Mao world, even if the movies are set, in hundreds of years ago. He does have kind of an intensely social aspect and mindset, in particular with a movie like something like To Live or even Red Sorghum. They do have these kind of social topics on their mind. This period is also the period that he works with Gong Li the most. Many of his movies in this early period, he's working with Gong Li, introduced her to kind of mainstream cinema, and she's worked in many kind of mainstream kind of Hollywood American movies, but she really got her start here, and I think is still most well known for her collaborations with Zhang Yimou, particularly in this period. And then the second half of his career, he stops working with Gong Li in the kind of late 90s, has a couple of weird experimentations where it's less politically minded, but it's not with the wuxia films, movies like Keep Cool, for example. But really, I think starting with 2002 and then onwards, he does really a lot of wuxia films, which is why I consider that kind of an important period for him, with movies like Hero and House of the Flying Dagger and Shadow. And a lot of these movies got American distribution through kind of the championing of directors like Quentin Tarantino and his connections through Miramax. They played in theaters and had some good box office results. We've talked about a director like Stephen Chow, who had kind of similar great results with the 2000s here. We're also a part of that wave of kind of Miramax international movies playing in the West and doing well and kind of bringing these great filmmakers to the West outside of the art house scenes, but into mainstream theaters. And his career did definitely change. I mean, in the sense of the wuxia films and even his movies up until today, they are less politically interested, less politically minded, and more so interested in action and visual, and became much more interested, I think, in the technical craft of filmmaking rather than some of the social and political commentaries that he was doing in his earlier films. But what about his whole career? Are there any similarities between the two periods? Of course there are. One thing that he loves is a wide shot. Oftentimes you'll have two men on either side of the frame, or two people in a frame and we only see their backs and we don't cut to the front of them. He doesn't really like to always cut in between dialogue scenes, like a shot reverse shot, kind of keeping that kind of painterly style to a lot of his visual aesthetics, particularly in the later films when he has a really gliding camera because of the elegance of the wuxia films. He relies on the stillness of his camera to really keep you in that kind of elegiac world. So he loves a wide shot, doesn't love a lot of kind of cutting between dialogue scenes to keep that painterly visual aesthetic. He's got a lot of strong female characters, oftentimes in connection with his work with Gong Li early in his films, but even later in some of his wuxia films, always featuring strong female characters and their perspective. I think he's great at giving a woman's POV in a lot of his movies and some of their internal struggles and dynamics from their perspective. And then also has a lot of romance in his movies, kind of steamy romance, passion-filled romances between either love triangles or men and women, and the kind of dynamics that result in these kind of fiery, passionate romances in movies like Raise the Red Lantern or Red Sorghum, where they're not just as simple as love, that there is this kind of either sexual tension or jealousy that kind of evolves in, and kind of how that is manipulated or forced upon certain people. He's interested in some of those kind of more complex romantic dynamics. And then, of course, I mentioned at the top, he is interested in China. And when I think about him, I think of a Chinese director, not only because he sets his movies in very different Chinese historical moments. So you'll set a movie in the Cultural Revolution, you'll set a movie in the Tang Dynasty, you'll set a movie in the 90s Beijing, kind of all throughout Chinese history. Almost all of his movies are set there, so I think of him that way. There's a lot of score in his movies, so we'll have instruments like the Chinese zither. And then he's almost always commenting on themes of Chinese culture coming together under one banner, on unity or surviving under turbulent times, under maybe a domineering government. There's lots of different kind of themes that he's interested in, and they're always connected to either set in the past commenting on modern Chinese history, or set in the past and commenting on past Chinese history and some of the differences between social classes or gender dynamics within history. And then I guess he's also well known for his use of color, in particular with his wuxia films later on in his career. I think that's probably what he's most well known for. That's what I most well knew him from. Movies like Hero or Shadow, and their kind of big, visually dynamic uses of color, and how we have great color movies, back in the Technicolor days, but he almost revived it in a certain aspect of his dedication to it as an art form, and it works really well with a lot of his movies, and he really is a skilled craftsman at that. And I want to talk a little bit more about that, and we'll talk about that now with our discussion of the film we're going to be talking about today, Hero. So jumping now into the discussion of the film. If you don't know, Hero is about a assassin who's working for the king, who recounts his story of killing 3 other assassins who were trying to kill the king. And in short, it's Rashomon meets Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. It's a wuxia film, which we've mentioned in the past. I just realized now that I haven't really explained necessarily what that is. And it translates, I think, directly to like martial arts in English. But wuxia is a genre film in and of itself. Starting off more popular in the 60s and the 70s with directors like King Hu, his movies Dragon Inn or A Touch of Zen. they're set in historical China, martial arts, kung fu movies, but they're fantastical kung fu movies. And the relationship to the stories and their connection to Chinese culture is almost the relationship to kind of ancient Greece and Greek tales. If you know any kind of basic stuff about Greek history, you know that they had a very advanced civilization, then they went into a dark ages, and then they had kind of a more modern civilization again. But during those dark periods, they knew about this advanced civilization, but they didn't know too much about them. They had all these kind of tools, but they didn't have the ability to recreate them. So they kind of wrote stories about these people that existed, but treated them as gods because they could do something that they couldn't. So these legends that passed on took these regular people and took them into these Greek god-like figures. And I think a similar situation is happening here, where you have these legends passed down for hundreds of years. You're talking about sometimes in AD or even BC before that of Chinese history, of these stories of these great warriors. And the great warrior starts off with killing three people, and then it turns into 300, and then they can kind of have these magical powers that they can float, and they can direct arrows out of the air. And that's the kind of inspiration that we get, these kind of fantastical legends that become maybe based in true story, but expand and become grandiose the more the legend and the story gets told. And this period in the 2000s, these movies were super popular. I think with Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon getting a lot of appreciation in the 2000, and then Hero 2002, and then House of Flying Dragon here in 2004. This early 2000s period was really instrumental for, I think, maybe even though the 60s and 70s kind of started, I think the 2000s were maybe the most popular period for this type of film. And actors like Jet Li or Gong Lu, were huge kind of international stars even outside of China. And I think Hero is one of the best. I think it's most well known for its use of color, and rightfully so. It is the movie's defining feature, and it's a genius bit of visual storytelling. First off, on the story point, why it's genius on that side is because it's a Rashomon type story in which we're telling a story about the same events but in different perspectives. So the easiest way to kind of understand which perspective you're in is it being represented by a different color. So there's one person's perspective that's all in green, another perspective that's all in white. And it's not just, a cheap Instagram filter. It's everything is in white. It's the dresses, it's the costumes, it's the sets, it's the environment. There really is a dedication to a certain color when we're kind of telling a story. And on a storytelling point, it's great because it just makes it very easy to understand whose perspective you're looking at. And then on a visual perspective, it's also interesting just because it looks interesting, and that keeps us engaged, that keeps us entertaining, because we're constantly just amazed and wowed by the production value of the film. And then I also think it's a great story within the wuxia genre, because the movie is about a man telling a story in the same way that these wuxia stories as a genre are these kind of fantastical retelling of stories. So there's an almost meta element there, and is fitting within the genre that is about telling stories in a genre so indebted to the fantastical natures of stories. And then the action is just fantastic and superb, oftentimes floating through the air. It's very elegant, different than the kind of shaky cam action that was popular during the times, but then also different than the kind of long take John Wick action that we're in right now. It's got its own kind of elegance and subtlety, with also having kind of great stunt work, and there's an appreciation between just the fight scenes between the swords and how they're very much more like a dance sometimes than they are necessarily action focused. So maybe more indebted to like the Chinese films of Jackie Chan and how he's able to insert comedy into his action scenes. This one, you're inserting kind of emotional drama or relationship history within the battle scenes and the fight scenes, which are more choreographed like a dance, with the kind of floating of the wire work and some of the great camera work that kind of dances almost with the fight scenes. So if you're interested in seeing one of the most visually dazzling movies ever made with some beautiful and elegant action set pieces, then you should definitely check out Hero to help us get another puzzle piece in finding out that when it comes to Asian cinema, there is more than Kurosawa. But that's about it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know if you've seen some of Zhang Yimou's films, or if you've seen Hero, House of the Flying Dagger, Raise the Red Lantern, or some other maybe great wuxia films that you've seen, like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. Like I mentioned in the past, it's Rashomon meets Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, so if you've seen either of those two movies, I definitely think you'd really like Hero. But that's about it. I'll be back next week with another one of these videos, Monday at 12 p.m. Eastern. But that's it. Until next time, stay tuned.